Hey guys, so today we look a little different, and the reason is because we're recording separately. And the reason for that is today's episode has slightly different content than what we're usually talking about.
Yeah, so just wanted to let you know that we'll be discussing some sensitive material, and this can be trigger. So we just want to give like a trigger warning. So feel free, like once you start listening to the episode and you start to feel triggered, yeah, don't feel obligated to listen to the rest of the episode. Do what's best for your mental health. Thanks for listening, guys. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Nuanced Nonsense. Today we're just doing an episode with just ourselves, and we're not experts and we like talking.
And I'm your co-host, Ben, and
this is your co-host, Alex.
yeah. And so today we decided to do a little bit more of a focus episode. I think the reason being is semi-recently there was a massive controversy about a massive Shonen Jump manga title called Act Age. And the TLDR of what happened was, so the manga was like really shooting up, especially since a lot of other series were ending. So it like positioned itself perfectly to sort of like get really, really big. And there was an anime in production and just a lot of things were looking right. And then there's an author and there's like a drawer. And so the author got arrested for public indecency by groping.
Yeah, he was groping middle school girls. He would ride on a bike and then he would just, sexually harass middle school girls that passed by him.
Yeah, and so essentially what happened is everything just got just like it hit a cliff. And I guess it makes sense, right? It's like it's understandable why you do that, and it's like you shouldn't enable things like this to happen. But the real problem is that like the drawer, she did nothing wrong. She just sort of got shafted. And so it sort of like prompted me to sort of go on my own and do research about other controversial titles, right? Because I'm just curious, like what happens to like certain things and like why things happen. Because this controversy, it makes perfect sense, right? It's like there is no like misunderstanding. This happened. It was reported by the police, and the police did something about it. And then like the rest of social media and like the wider world sort of like acted, right? And so like one of several like interesting things I found is like, for example, Death Note. I didn't even understand why it was controversial. And then so I like looked more into it. And so during the series' original run in China and in the US particularly, more in China, people would come to school, like particularly middle schoolers and high schoolers, with death notes of all of their enemies written in their death notes. And it like really prompted a lot of like, I guess like tension between like students, because it's like, you can't just like come to school and just like look at people and like write their names down, like hoping they die, that just sort of doesn't prompt the right attitude about like life in general. And so that became controversial in those areas. And so they had to ban like the usage of death notes in those schools. And I just thought that was really funny and how it's like controversial. I think a really interesting point that I saw like across like doing my research is that when you like controversy sort of like changes and like things that are controversial for different reasons throughout different time periods. So for example, like My Hero Academia is like massively popular in the West and in Japan in the current day being basically end of August, beginning of September. And it's like, it catches flack for a lot of strange things that I don't quite understand myself. Like there are things like characters like Mineta, like the grape head dude that like is obviously very controversial. But then there's like very strange things that like catch massive controversy and it blows up on Twitter. Like for example, I remember I read a controversy in My Hero Academia about how they didn't put in a pose. Like, it was legit just like one panel from manga about these 4 cat heroes doing a pose. They didn't put that in, and it like blew up and trended on Twitter. And then like they had to apologize for it, and just like all these strange things My Hero Academia catches a lot of flack for, and just like other big titles like this just strangely catch a lot of controversy. I'm just curious, Alex, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so when you brought up My Hero Academia, I actually remember there were like 2 controversies, big ones. So one was there is a scientist. This is slight spoilers, but for the sake of the controversy, I'll say it. So there's a scientist in the series. His name is Maruta Shiga, and he works on something called the Nomu for the villains, and they're basically just like these brainless monsters who have like a lot of quirks into kind of compiled into them. But Maruta Shiga is kind of like Maruta means log, and that was a reference to the kind of human experimentation that Japan did during World War II, like specifically the Imperial Japanese Unit 731, and they conducted human experiments. So basically people feel like, you know, it was a reference to that, and it was like very insensitive. And what happened was, I think he apologized for the naming of the character. I don't know if he changed the name of the character, but I think in that case, that kind of ties into the whole Japan doesn't really educate their citizens on the war crimes they did during the war, during the old wars. To be fair, most countries don't, but that's another example. I remember seeing, I don't know if it was an actual controversy, but I remember on Reddit at the time, people were kind of steaming over it, and it was actually over Endeavor, the father of Shoto
Todoroki.
Hodoroki, yeah. So because basically Endeavor is he's a bit of an abusive father. So people did not like the fact that he was having a redemption arc to redeem it from that.
Oh
And
yeah,
then
that.
yeah, and then because eventually he kind of comes to terms that he's a shitty father, and then he's like, I don't have a right for forgiveness, but I'll do my best to make sure the rest of my family is happy. And there's a lot of context as to why he acted the way he did, but so for some people, they're just like, hey, he was abusive. Like, we will never forgive that type of character because of, you know, we've had those experiences in the past. And yeah, I remember a lot of people didn't like the direction the manga was going with that. And I don't know. I don't think it, I'm not sure if it blew up like outside of Reddit. But yeah, I remember like at the time, I was like very conflicted because I guess, you know, if manga or anime is, you know, having content that can kind of trigger people, then like it makes sense like why they would not want to see it, right? But for a lot of people who don't have those experiences, you don't really understand the feelings of those people who do, so you're not going to want to see that canceled, especially if it's not applicable to you. And yeah, as a person who didn't grow up in an abusive household, it was very hard for me to relate to those people. And I think it's just something like I had to like develop empathy for. I wouldn't even say I completely empathize with them completely, but yeah, but that is definitely one type of controversy. I know not just the manga, the anime, but for a lot of media that occurs when you know, the content contains like a situation that is representative of a lot of controversies in the real world. But I know Ben was mentioning that there are other controversies that aren't necessarily just based on the actions of certain characters that are bad.
Yeah, like the one I was referencing, or what I was thinking of as Alex was bringing this up, was how there are rape controversies in anime. Not like necessarily like someone rapes another, but in the anime, you choose to depict rape, and it's like that itself is not problematic, right? Because like it's like if you want to like produce media, you can tackle any like subject you want, you know. But it's like a matter of like elegant portrayal is like the key topic, and so it's like some things like Goblin Slayer and Sword Art Online, I wouldn't say portray it too elegant, right? Like for example, in Sword Art Online, in each season there is like a rape scene. It's like it kind of like you don't learn, you know? And what's even more interesting is that if you go back and you look at them and you see like the amount of animation effort they took to put into these rape scenes, like for example, like Asuna in season 1, and then like I didn't follow Sword Art Online after season 1, but like I heard about these because it blew up. It was like the one where it's like Alicization, where it's like 2 girls are like getting raped by these 2 guys. And then like again with like the recent Alicization one, where it's like his cousin sister person, Lisa, I think. It's like they just keep inserting these, and it's like it doesn't necessarily move the plot forward that much. And in terms of elegant portrayal, they show the act itself. It's kind of not necessary to show it. And it's like even when they do show it, it's like strangely sexualized. Like there's certain angles that they don't need to portray. There's certain ways that things like move across the female body that it doesn't need to move. And in particular, the one where it's like the two guys raping the two girls in the first part of Alicization, they strangely put a lot of frames of animation. Like some things are like very, very smooth. Like I was watching a video about it and he was talking about how like they must have put in like considerable time, or at least a decent amount of time, into producing the scene, because like the way the characters move is very fluid, and it's like that comes with more frames of animation, right? And so that begs the question, like, why did they think this was like a good like use of their time, you know? And then with Slayer, the same thing applies. And so I was just like thinking about it. It's like, what kind of is the purpose of like putting these in? It's like controversial is like the perfect way to put it. It's like these don't need to be there, and it's like I'm sitting there watching it. Like, what is the point? And then, like, I think the reason why I have this opinion is because when you put it in relative context. So, for example, something that I really, really enjoyed that they added was the rape scene in Psycho-Pass. They didn't actually show the act itself. It was more about the before and after, right? It's like the reason why, the motive behind this happening, and it's like the trauma of it occurring afterwards, and like the characters trying to overcome it after the fact, right? So it's like, in terms of elegant portrayal, the thing isn't there, you know? It's like, it's just implications that happen. Like you can see, like it's angled off in a way where it's like, you can tell it's happening, but you can't see anything detailed, right? And so, I don't know. It's just part of like what I researched, and I was just like, this is so strange that it's like, that this has to be like a problem. Like I don't see, it's like, it just seems very easy to me, right? You don't need to just like put that much effort into like easily depicting this. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's interesting because the fact that you said there was an elegant way to, I guess, portray rape in media, I was curious to see like, so the ones that, you know, didn't actually depict the rape, like they didn't waste, you know, animators' time to like frame by frame, you know, portray a rape scene. Like, so were those animes like well received? Or they
So
didn't face a controversy? That's my main question.
yeah, they
Like,
didn't face a controversy about it. It was more applauded because they're like, wow, you tackled this in like a meaningful way. I think part of this original Psycho-Pass run, it just tackled a lot of really interesting subjects in a very nuanced way. And so that's why it was like straight up applauded on multiple fronts.
okay, yeah. It's been a while since I watched Psycho-Pass, so honestly, I should rewatch it because I don't remember anything except for like the ending in the beginning. But
I mean, we can also talk about it in like the flip sense, right? It's like if you think about like the critical reception to like Sword Art Online and Goblin Slayer, it's like very, very negative.
that's true. Goblin Slayer is pretty controversial, and the same Sao is kind of derided by most of the anime community. But I think there's actually a phrase called "woman in fridges" or refrigerators, and this is related to the rape thing. But I think it kind of depicts how like women are, you know, kind of treated as plot devices for the main character to pursue something in the story. And it comes from that because in Green Lantern, I think there's one of the Green Lanterns' name is Kyle Ratner, and his girlfriend was brutally murdered and cut up into pieces and put in the refrigerator. And I think for rape, it kind of is usually seen as one of those things where it's like, you know, does it need to be done? Like, do you have to, like, why would you ever need to like depict rape in a story, like beyond the purpose of like, I don't know, it makes the main character angry and he wants to seek revenge to his girlfriend. And that's something like I personally was like, that's a really good point, you know, but then does that mean that we should avoid like any, you know, bad things in media? Like, you know, how about like murder, for example, or stuff like that? And this is a tangent that I don't want to go too deep into, but it kind of raises the question of like, well, how do you write good characters and how do you treat them well in the context of the story? Because I think a lot of these controversies, you know, they go off the point where like we need something bad to happen, but we don't really view our characters as like real people, right? Because the best characters are the most fleshed out. Like if they happen to be in a world, like you would, you know, have a relationship with them to some extent. But the problem is for a lot of these controversial stories, they don't treat their characters very well. So it just ends up being like a plot point. And my kind of like, you know, thinking of a counterpoint to this, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, is Berserk, you know, because in Berserk, they have a very famous rape scene where I think Griffiths he loses his mind
And
as a
he
griffin.
rapes
Yeah, he
Guts.
rapes Kasuka. Could be mispronouncing this, but
I don't know. I don't. I just know that it's Guts's girlfriend, right?
or Guts has a relationship, or they're interested in each other to some point. I haven't fully read Berserk because it's on hiatus all the time, and I don't want to get invested into that. But um, yeah, I remember from what I understood, he depicts the scene very detailedly and graphically, to the point where it's almost kind of like torture porn. And um, I think it's controversial, but it's also been like so long that I'm not too sure quite what the reception to that is. But uh, I guess Berserk is something that's known for, having good characters and like having like it's not quite at the same level as Sao or Goblin Slayer. So I was curious to see your thoughts on like, despite the fact that they depicted it, was it done in an elegant way?
I don't know. Like, I personally haven't read Berserk either for the same reasons as you. However, I do not think it is quite as elegant because it has the same ring as like the Goblin Slayer method of portraying rape, right? It's just like they depict it like a lot. It's to the point where it's like torture porn, exactly like you said. And it's just like there to like either traumatize the characters or like make them angry, right? And it's like the fact that it's shown so like in such great detail is like you rationalize it in several ways, right? So it's like I remember I read an interview by the author of Goblin Slayer, and he was talking about how it's like the point of it was that so it's like the main character in that very first arc is like this like young girl who's like in over her head. She's like a priest. She has no combat capabilities, and so she's like just sees all of this, and it's like unfiltered through her eyes. And so as the audience, he wanted to be equally as unfiltered, so you can feel her fear, right? Since she's also a girl, she feels the same fear as like that girl who's like being raped by that like ogre or something. And so it's like, I guess you can rationalize it that way, but I think it just like it has a very heavy tone of like women in fridges, like exactly like you said, because then that character disappears from the story as a whole. However, in Berserk, that character doesn't, and I think that is like arguably quote unquote better. However, I still don't like it, but it's like since she still plays like an active role in the plot after that point, and it's like you can still see like the interaction of like Guts and whoever her name is, and so you can see them like trying to overcome the trauma and just like things that occur past that, and you can see like Guts having to live with it because he saw it as well. It's like things like that. I think it's like not acceptable, but it's quote unquote better.
Okay, maybe. Yeah, I don't. It's hard for me to actually comment because I've never actually read Berserk, but
Same.
at least I feel like to this day Berserk is somewhat revered, and is not seen to to be the same as Sao or Goblin Slayer. So maybe that's something we should research more for a follow-up episode. But yeah, I was just curious because yeah, I think at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to like how are you writing your character, and like how are you treating them as just as a means to an end? Because in that case, like it's not necessary at all, and especially like how you said in Sao Alicization, like when they're like I don't know, like depicting like a lot of frames going on and like things are moving like that super necessary to the plot? Like not really, but this is a balance. Something like this reminds me of actually it's not an anime, but it's a very famous TV show, like Game of Thrones. Um, I think George R. Martin, like he's known for being able to write good like female characters. At least that's his reputation. Haven't read or watched the series, so can't confirm. But interestingly, I think there's a lot of rape, like literally there's like incest, like there's a lot of like very taboo subjects in the story. And I remember reading like an interview. I think that's like something like he's interested in. He thinks at the root of humanity, like we're all very sexual creatures, and like we can't really control that. That we've made it taboo to do so, um, to even openly talk about. And like I think he kind of wants to deconstruct that, and that's why it's so graphic in Game of Thrones. But yeah, I guess in that case, it's also like more accepted compared to like other maybe TV series or movies.
I think that I think whenever you delve into the realm of deconstruction, it touches upon like meta elements of media, and I guess people are just like more likely to accept things like that. Like, not to say that like depicting those things is good, but like it definitely is more mainstream, and it's like I guess it's handled with more care because it seems like he thought about it more, because like just things like that are very meta, and it's like when you delve into that realm, you kind of like are forced to think about like why and how do I deconstruct this thing. I think a really interesting deconstruction to think about is like Madoka Magica, right? It was such a well done deconstruction. It completely flipped the magical girl genre to the point it's like now every magical girl show is just trying to be edgy and dark, right? And so it's like
Yeah.
a matter of like how do you depict these things like in a way that like is still like like you can still depict it, but it's like a way that makes sense to the audience without like making them outraged, right? So for example, Madoka Magica, the whole production team was behind it. I'm pretty sure George R. Martin had the whole thing in on him too. But it's like in this one specifically, they had the marketing team helping them out because it's like they marketed Magica as like a just a regular like magical girl show, and then everyone was just kind of confused when it came out in 2013 because they're like, this is Shaft, you know, they made the Monogatari series, like what are they doing kind of making a magical girl series? It's like very not on brand, right? And then it comes out and then people are like, oh, I get it now. And
Yeah.
so it's like it was deconstructed in a way that was like it like sort of like changed the whole narrative of the entire genre, which speaks to like the meta elements of it. And I'm assuming George R. Martin has some of that as well, right? It's because like I feel like medieval shows or like things that are like very brutal in nature. I can't think of any right now, but like I know that like I feel like if I were to watch one, they are very brutal.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like based on the time period, they literally call it the Dark Ages. At least places that would even need a knight castle system. So that makes sense. I think what I'm kind of getting away from this is that I think if you're genuine and you handle the thing with respect, like you're not sexualizing uh, rape or other controversies. I think for the most part, people will understand, and as long as you're not constantly doing it, then um, it won't be as controversial. At least, yeah, to my eyes, from what I understand about the situation. But what are some other controversies that aren't necessarily because of like bad actions that people took? Because I understand there's like accessibility concerns for some,
Yeah.
or there's like the personal life of the creator and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of really strange ones out there. Like for example, I did a little bit more research right before this episode happened, and it's like the original run of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Like it was just like a couple episode OVA. It's like apparently they like showed the Quran in there, and it got like some backlash from Muslim fans, and that's just like strange. Like what I personally did not understand what is the issue of showing the Quran. But I think it's because like Dio is like quote unquote evil and he was holding the Quran and they're like the Quran is not evil. I think.
Oh, is that the reason? Yeah, I'm not too familiar with Islamic customs either, but I do remember they have something like you cannot depict any pictures or like a Muhammad's face, and that's not exactly the same thing as depicting the Quran, but maybe that's it. But I do know in like I know for like commercials and stuff like that, like if like a TV series is like controversial, they don't want the company does not want to have a brand association with them, right? Because the logic is like, like I'm watching, some TV series is super brutal and they just killed like 50 people and it's super bloody, and then or someone said something racist, then vitamin water pops up, and you're like, drink vitamin water, and then the audience will be like, fuck vitamin water, like, fuck this TV series. And I'm making it seem super silly, but like that's legitimately apparently like people will like would associate negative like feelings and imagery with the brand because they were associated with like that form of media or person, in case of like that's why in cancel culture like companies will drop sponsorships for players or actors because you don't want to be associated with that person in the moment.
Yeah,
So
I think I think that's actually the reason I brought this up earlier, is why controversy has kind of shifted. In modern day, controversy is like kind of like it's up front and center. There's a lot of it, and it kind of feels like there's too much of it, you know? And so, like, for example, when we were talking about like My Hero Academia and a lot of like other modern anime, one that I can also bring up is like Darling in the Franxx. That one's just like riddled with like unusual issues in like production, storytelling, yada yada yada. And there's like one of the controversies, it was that like in the middle of the series, it's like this one girl kisses the main character even though he's like blatantly in love with this other girl, and it like erupted into like, part of it was like a joke. It's like, oh, she's not best girl, she can't have that kind, and part of it was like legitimate. And then there's just like, in general, these types of controversies in the modern day can like erupt very easily. However, if we like shift the time frame back to like, let's say the 90s, when I was like looking at some anime like I've never even heard of, and it's like a lot of them were only controversial in Japan, and like also anime wasn't very accessible in the West at the time. It's like a lot of them were just controversial in Japan because like they didn't want to air this on TV. It's too quote unquote sexual. And so it's like then it's like how do you define like what is too sexual? Like what breaks your bounds, right? Because like some things are like considered too sexual, as in like the sense Neon Genesis Evangelion, which like I find that hard to believe. But then there's also things that are too sexual, just like borderline hentai, right? So
Yeah. What was so sexual about Neon Genesis Evangelion? Maybe I'm desensitized by the media these days.
I think it's the thing with like Shinji and Asuka. I think that.
Oh, okay, that makes sense actually.
Off to her like unconscious body, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I understand that's controversial. Yeah, that could be seen as sexual assault.
Yeah, but I feel like in the general scope of things, it's not. It's not like it's unairable. You know, you can just censor it, like what they do with like a million other fucking anime.
Yeah, I think here's the thing is that for a lot of anime and manga, things are very sexualized and just very casual. Like, you know, there's always these gimmicks where like the main character or some perverted guy will flip a girl's skirt, or he will land in her boobs, or you know, she will fall on him and all of a sudden like she's sitting on his face.
Dude, you're giving me under like fucking triggers, and I'm just getting so triggered.
All right. Anyway, because you know, screw Ben's feelings. But just kidding. But there was actually a petition by some random Japanese guy. He asked Shonen Jump to not necessarily censor like ecchi manga, but to have a warning that like that the female characters in the story are not being consented to some of these actions. And it really made me think about, how much of this stuff is normalized. Because I think in the eyes of non-Japanese people, this would be controversial. But I think Japan, you know, we won't get too into it, but they do have a history of sexism in their culture, and it's accepted because of that. And honestly, I think, you know, even though I'm not Japanese and I don't live in Japan, like reading a lot of manga and watching anime, you're just desensitized to a lot of the stuff that goes on. And it's only weird if you know you have to show it to like a non manga reading, anime watching person, but then you kind of justify by just being like, oh, they're just too prude or they're not used to shit, right? But then, yeah, in reality, I feel like a lot of anime would be controversial if I don't know, say like your local Karen saw it, and then she's like, what will my little boy become if he watches this, you know? So I actually have two questions. Like, do you think that petition is like what do you feel about the petition? Because I know that was pretty controversial, at least in the comments of Anime News Network. To be fair, that place is basically like a gossip rag tabloid for anime. But to them, some of them were arguing, hey, like this is fine. You know, some women were saying, I don't feel fine. Some women were saying, I do feel fine. And then the second question is, how much do you think, you know, media really influences kids? Kind of like the argument of violent video games have a negative effect and, you know, will produce future school shooters.
Okay, so the petition, I think it is rightfully controversial, especially since its origin is Japanese, and it is like in their culture, it's like normal. And it's like, for example, as you said, we're very desensitized to things that happen in anime and manga. And so it's like when you try to like call like notice to something that's quote unquote normal, people are just like, hey, what the heck? But I don't think it's that abnormal to want to like petition for something like that. I think it's just because we grew up in the West and stuff like this isn't accepted and people don't stand for it. And so I also think that's like the reason why when you bring anime over to the West, it erupts in controversy with like characters like Mineta from My Hero Academia being like one of the more prominent ones. Like those things are literally just like to Japanese people, it's just like one note. Like you just put it in there because you put it in there. There's no rhyme or reason. It's just if you get anime, you get anime and it's in there. Like for example, the whole show of Plunderer is that shit. But like, hey, what can I say? You know, like I don't make this stuff. I just consume it. But like, I personally don't think the petition is like out of whack or anything, but it's seen as abnormal in the Japanese community, which is understandable. And so like, hey, like if it went through, more power to them. If it didn't, I guess sucks to suck. You have no choice but to just continue watching or just like you don't watch it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it probably won't go too far because there's only like 1,000 signatures, but it was controversial, at least on the website.
Fair.
Yeah.
What was the second question?
How much do you think media really has an effect on its viewers with controversial content? Like the whole argument of, violent video games will make children more violent. Maybe they'll become school shooters.
Here, I guess we can look at this like analysis via extreme example, right? So for example, this is a little tangential, but it's like Twitch streamers, like in particular females, like they sort of like cultivate an audience of like, I don't want to describe them as Sims because it's like a very trite word and it doesn't exactly portray the same aura anymore because it's been used so much, but like it cultivates that audience of like males that are willing to donate money just to see something or get noticed or just get attention. And so like I like the media definitely like had a role in like creating that persona, right? But I don't think it was like entirely the media. Like it had a role, but it wasn't entirely because of media. And likewise, like I don't think like violent games make school shooters, but it could play a role. Like I'm pretty sure like if you've never played violent video games, you probably never want to like think about shooting a gun. Like obviously that's like a very generalized example and people will probably disprove me with a lot of counterexamples, but like just in general, like if you don't have exposure to violence, you're not going to think about it. And that's just like how it is, right? If like ignorance is bliss. And so it's like the idea of like, if you never get exposed to anything, you're just going to be blank slate your whole life. And so I feel like there is some element of like, it can be like a minor influencing factor, but I don't think it will ever evolve into a major one.
Yeah, like maybe it might be the thing that pushes you over the edge, but it won't cultivate someone into becoming like that. Because yeah, I guess like I was thinking like, I mean, I think people can still become violent through like their own personal interactions with like people, like maybe family or friends. If the relationship goes poorly, like I think anger can take over someone that can cause them to do something stupid, but they're not necessarily going to, become super violent to the extreme, like the stereotypical school shooter meme. So I do think that for, I think content-wise, with like, tying this back to like manga and anime, I think it's one of those things like you need to have faith in your audience, right? Like there's a kind of related idea, like, sometimes some stories are very exposition heavy because, treat your audience like they're dumb. But that tends to leave most audiences pretty bored and not fulfilled by the story because it's, they already understand what's going on and you're slowing down the pace. It's not as enjoyable. And I guess in this case, it's also like, don't assume your audience is like a wild beast that's shackled by the chains of civilization, and any exposure to the things outside of that will be a domino effect and they'll lose all control because at the same time like that, I think that's a very legalistic and puritanic mindset, and it can, yeah, lead to a lot of repressed feelings, you know, maybe of like repressed emotions, repressed sexuality. Like, I actually do think for a lot of, you know, people who read manga and watch anime, I don't want to stereotype too hard, but I think a lot of them, you know, are repressed in both regards. And that's maybe kind of why, like, even though this content is controversial, is still, you know, widely consumed, right? It's like that saying that like everyone hates Nickelback, but someone's still buying their shit if it's like that popular, you know? So yeah, I guess like, you know, kind of my thoughts on this are basically, it's like you don't want to go too hard at something, because I think if you try to fight fire with fire, you know, the flame will only grow higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also like something else I wanted to bring up, sort of like the major cultivation of all of this is the Monogatari series as an entity. So it's like I am personally a fan of it. I think it's very like insightful. It offers like a really cool look at life in a way that's just like it seems supernatural, but then when you boil it down, it's just like you gotta like laugh at life and like the, you know, the cards that you're given, and also like you gotta strive to like pick up your own pieces, you know, when things fall down. And so it's like I think it has like a very good core message, but the way some things are depicted is like very, very not so good. Like for lack of better phrasing, I think it's like the Monogatari series itself is not like widely popular, which is I think good because it would be wrapped in controversy. But like I think it's had an effect on like the deeper sort of like manga anime community, because a lot of people know about it in like sort of the deeper like echelons of it. And for example, like the things that come to mind when people bring it up, it's like fan service of like little girls, like the main character like being like having kind of like a harem, and it's like the toothbrush scene, with like most of like the emphasis going onto the toothbrush scene.
Yeah, I was thinking about the toothbrushing you brought about, and you've brought up controversy in the series.
Because like it's so strange that it exists, and there's a lot of like people like out there like saying it's good, it's bad, trying to rationalize it, trying to go like this is troll. And so like I watched a video talking about just like problematic media and like Monogatari in its place in this issue, right? And so it's like Monogatari itself is very, very insightful, and it offers like a really interesting look into like these characters' minds, and they're treated with like real people. Like as you said earlier, this is the type of series where it's like the author wants you to believe these are living, breathing people. And so like what's strange is like the fact that like the main character, he like randomly has these tendencies to do things that are like sexual harassment. Like for example, his relationship with Hajakuji, which is like this little girl, he's like constantly fondling her and like doing lots of like very sexually indecent things. And it's like you can see a lot of different rationalizations for something like this. So it's like one video I also happened to click on, they're talking about how like Hachakuji, like she could only be talked to by like the main character and this other character, which like serves to like sort of indicate that like since those two characters kind of like have like strange views on life, it could like lead to believe that they're like delusional, right? And that she's just like some figment of their imagination. And it's like this is just like his inner sort of like sexual urges, like in its like fantasization, right? Which just leads to making him seem like a pedophile. But like that's besides the point. And it's just like I think it's like very strange that it's like that you want to rationalize it, but at the same time, it's like when you get so tied to a work, it's like you obviously do want to defend it when people are like, hey, this is not good. You're like, hey, it actually is good. That's just that specific part is not so good. And so the whole back to the original video I was talking about problematic media is like should like these types of series be enabling this type of stuff to happen? It's like if a good series is doing it, what makes it why would a lesser series not want to do it, right? Because like this element in the good series is still okay. And so it's like this enables problematic media to continue existing, right? And so it's just like I don't know. Like I agree with that, but it's like do you think there is some element of like shock factor that like these series incorporate these things just so it's like it shocks the audience? And it's like that's their primary like reason, like so it just isn't all like like exposition or like yada 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 world building or something. They like need to add these shock factor things to grab the audience's attention.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's very hard to delineate when something is used well. Like even like if you're like the best director or writer, like you're not always gonna hit your stuff like 10 out of 10, you know. So I think I think for the first part of your question, like, should there even be should we allow media to enable, bad media to use these elements just because it was used well in this good series? And I think it's hard to say because even for like non-controversial elements, like I think bad media, bad stories will still try to capitalize on those aspects because they don't really, I don't think they really understand what goes into making a good story. They're just there for a good cash grab, or they like the element of it, but they don't really understand how it works in conjunction with the rest of the story. So I think it's just one of those things where, in my opinion, I would just live with the fact that there'll always be bad stories who are not correctly utilizing elements of these stories. Like, would I prefer for there not to be controversial things? Like, yes, but at the same time, maybe this is a hot take, but I think if it's not done all the time, I think having controversial topics and conversations is still good for people in society, because I think if you try to always play it safe, I think everyone feels bored and there's no growth from that. But I think the best stories make you wrestle with the uncomfortable nature of stuff, right? Because there are some controversial series where they're controversial because of the content at the time was not acceptable to talk about, right? So, but now in retrospect, like, it's okay. So, and I think I can't name any specific examples on the top of my head right now, but I think a lot of examples would be like stories depicting the LGBTQ community. So say like Brokeback Mountain, right? I think that was controversial at the time because it's a gay romance story. But like now, like there's so many like lesbian romance stories coming up. There's yeah, I remember there was one film last year, I think it was like Lady by the Portrait something Fire. Yeah, I'm butchering that. But then now they have something like called the Ammonite or something. And like on that side, I was like, dude, these films are almost identical. It's like a very similar plot where it's like two women fall in love. And I mean, I do think lesbian romance is very sexualized, and it's really hard to tell if it's like, truly they're trying to truly depict something controversial to, think more, if it's just done in the context of male gaze where we're just like, oh, two girls are fucking. That's like, that appeases my sexual desires, who knows? But I think, to kind of go back, because I got a little sidetracked, but I think that there are some controversial topics that like may not be controversial in the future. Another example was like in Star Trek. This is around the 60s, I think. So this is segregation era. I think Captain Kirk, who was white, and Uhura, who was black, they had a kiss, and that was controversial. But later on, we're like, oh, this is a groundbreaking moment. So I think it's really hard to tell in the moment. And honestly, I think I'm kind of the logic like, hey, we'll let these people make mistakes, and we'll cancel them if necessary. But I think if you're always trying to predict things, like I won't do this because it might be bad, I feel like you end up missing out on a lot of potential good accomplishments or achievements that can be done. So I guess in short, I would say yes, it's bad that some media enables other media to do things, but I feel like they will be shut down and it's understood. And I think even impressionable audiences, like maybe kids or teenagers, like they'll know that it's bad not to do that. And I think that is a lesson to be learned. I don't remember the second half of your question.
Second half of my question was, I think I got lost in my own shit. What was it?
All right, that's not a big deal. What do you think about my response then?
I think your response hits it pretty nail on the head. Like I didn't bring it up, but the video, it sort of like talk about exactly what you were talking about. It's like if you don't have anyone sort of like putting their neck out there to do something, then it's like everything sort of like resides on the same level, and it's like eventually the audience will like get very jaded by like what you're like depicting, right? So for example, it's like I'm not saying you have to go out there and like depict like sexual harassment or like something all the time, but it's like because some series put their necks out there and want to like talk about like the trauma people face because of this in like a creative way and like in a insightful way, there's like it enables the platform to go like, hey, like you can still do this. Like if you want to tell like this quote unquote risky story, but it has like a good point, then like go ahead and tell it, right? And it's like I think it's like overall good. It does more good than bad. But it's like there are still like sometimes like the bad is like, damn, you know, I wish that wasn't there. But like sometimes it's just like kind of like how when you roll the dice, it's sort of just like it turns up that way.
Yeah. I think I remember something you said earlier, like shock value. Yes. I think at the time, like, yeah, it was never done before, so it makes sense. But I think the more you do it, the less meaningful it is. And I would agree in that case, like, yeah, there's no need to explore the topic the same way because there's so much shock value done already. And I think that kind of just goes back to the case of like they don't understand what makes a story great. Like there's something called the Seinfeld effect, where it's there's original shows so groundbreaking, they start so many tropes and little things that characters do that other TV shows copy it. It becomes cliche, so that when someone goes back and watches the OG show like Seinfeld, like, oh, I don't think this is that good. When reality is, it was so good that it became cliche, you know. And I guess like that's a more positive example of the effects, but I think for this controversial stuff, like there's like a negative side when people depict it. Like I know for a lot of like gritty, you know, TV series, they want to be seen as super dark and like, oh, nothing's off limits. We'll just brutally murder this guy. We'll brutally rape this person. We'll brutally beat up this thing, right? And if it's like not done like tastefully or, you know, with good faith, then yeah, something doesn't feel right to the audience. And I can see why that's controversial. I think that's like the big thing with a lot of DC films versus like Marvel films. Like it kind of felt like DC was just being dark on purpose without really understanding like the origins of the character. Like when Man of Steel came out, it was a dark take on Superman. And I think you can always like you can always successfully reinterpret characters, but I think the way it was done for Superman wasn't super genuine. So it felt like DC just wants to capitalize on the success of Batman, who I think interestingly was successfully reinterpreted as a dark, gritty character. Because in the 1960s, I think, you know, Batman was very lighthearted, and you know, I think comics back then were like for kids. So like, I think the idea of Batman was just wasn't taken very seriously, and it only wasn't until like I think the 80s when around the Watchmen era and Batman Year One, Batman became a dark and gritty character. And I think ever since then, Batman has always been a dark and gritty character. And if you read like whenever there's a new Batman writer, they'll always be like, we're going to try to explore the depths of Bruce Wayne's psyche and see like, is Batman the mask or is Bruce Wayne the mask? And it can lead to some pretty controversial stuff. Like, I think there was literally a point where in the series, like someone was cutting people's faces off and putting it onto different people. And it's just one of those things where like, if every single series is about, you know, how can we break Batman down, you know, it's super dark and gritty, then I feel like it's lost impact, right? Because now everyone knows Batman is super dark and gritty. It wouldn't be more interesting to depict in a more a neutral tone or light tone? Like, I think it would. I don't know how you would do it because I'm not a comic book writer, but I think, you know, it's a very similar story in manga and anime, right? You even touched upon it with the Magic Girl series, where now every magical girl anime is a deconstruction. But if everything is a deconstruction, there is no deconstruction, right? It's just become part of the genre.
Yeah, like I totally agree. And just another example I thought while you're talking about this is like Teen Titans, the like animated series versus Titans, the live action series. Like one is very lighthearted, it's meant for kids, and it's just like I grew up watching it, so it's like there's that nostalgic air about it, and so like they bring it back, or they attempt to bring it back in this live action version of it, And it's just like, you see the trailer. I remember the trailer, it was like a lot of fans hated it because it's just like Robin's like, fuck Batman. And it's just like all this like random stuff just happens. It like deviates so much from like this nostalgic view people had of the original Teen Titans that just like, it sort of like really breaks the audience immersion in the characters, right? Because it's like, why would Robin ever say fuck Batman when it's just like, why does he kill people? And why are the people look like this? Why are the powers like this? Like, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I think it's just like, when you change it so much, you lose like that shine / glimmer that the original property had. And I'm not saying the OG is always the best, but it's like sometimes when you like reimagine something, it is really hard to like capture the same luster that the original property had. And I guess that's like why the Star Wars like continued trilogies just felt so lackluster, is because it's like they're trying to recapture like the things that made the original trilogy great. Like for example, in episode 7, a lot of people talk about how it was very similar to like A New Hope, and just like stuff like that. It's like, it's really hard to sort of like retrace your steps. And so it's like, if you can't retrace your steps, what do? It's like, let's resort to like adding more mature themes. Like let's explore like the darker parts of like something, right? Because like it's quote unquote easier to go darker than it is to go lighter. Because like the lighter you go, it like makes it more and more like for children, quote unquote.
Yeah.
When you make it darker, it appeals to a more mature audience. So you're quote unquote capturing a larger audience. But hey, what do I know? I'm not like a writer of any sorts. I just sort of like watch these things.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's just yeah, I think that's an interesting like comment about how like it lighters for children, because I think that there's the world has become more cynical, and I think there's this narrative like to be an adult is to be a cynic, right? Like if you want to like believe in love and peace and like looking after people, you're just naive. You haven't been broken yet. And that's reflected in the media. And I think that this turn has really come around since the 80s, and I think that's kind of around the Cold War. So I think it's just an interesting thing that how like politics has kind of affected the way we consume media. Because I think maybe I'm completely talking about my ass right now, but I think it really felt like even in manga, not just comics, but stories are a lot more hopeful in like the 50s. And 60s. I know that the 60s wasn't necessarily a great time for people who weren't white in America, but I guess it really comes to show that like a lot of it really just depends on like the mood, the social mood and climate that's going on. Like now that people are more aware of maybe systemic injustice in like certain countries or in the world, then it's more likely that the stories will be darker as well to reflect the attitude, right? And a part of me is wondering, like, can we even go back? I remember Brad Bird, he was the director of Incredibles. He wanted to make a film based on hope called Tomorrowland. And that film was panned. And it was not received well. Okay, maybe panned is hard. It received mixed reviews. But I guess to the stature of, Brad Bird, this man made The Incredibles, Ratatouille, other great films like or Mission Impossible too. Like he literally revitalized the franchise. It was kind of a shock, and to me at least, and it really made me think like, are there no more series that will, I guess, kind of capture on this type of hope? I remember there was a children's series, a children's TV show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, I think.
Oh,
yeah. And that series was a lot about kind of like education, and the TV host, he kind of inspired a lot of hope and change, but he never shied away from real topics. But it was most definitely, I guess maybe because it was a children's series, it was not like super by the way, kids, when you grow up, life is gonna suck and just give up, like. And there was an autobiographical film. Like it's not a documentary, but it was something that I guess that kind of capturing like the impacts of Mr. Rogers, and it was a very hopeful film. So I'm just wondering if it's even possible to go back to that route, because a lot of films these days are controversial mainly because they're going into these dark topics.
I I like the optimist in me says like I want to like see hopeful media, right? But it's like if you look at like the climate, like let's just like centralize to anime and manga for a second, because like if you look at like the seasonal like thing and the things that are popular, the things that get the most popular are like the dark and gritty things. And it's like they explore these elements of humanity that like that aren't typically put on broadcast. I think I read like an article one time. It was talking about it's like the reason why people like horror is because it's like unhinged and people like this sort of like gruesome aspect on it just like deep down. And so it's like for example, let's like think about this, right? Recent times, Made in Abyss won Anime of the Year. Like we also had Devilman, Crybaby coming in really close. Recently, ReZero is like mega popular. Like these franchises that like touch on very, very dark and depraved subjects are massively popular. And it's like, it's really hard to move away from a winning formula. But like I do like the attempt at like, you know, like for example, sports anime. It's like very hopeful in nature, like Haikyuu. It's like as like this amazing message of like, you know, it's like genetics isn't everything. You can like fucking go be good at volleyball, no matter how disadvantaged you are. Stuff like that. So it's like I would love to believe that hopeful like media can sort of like be equally as popular as like dark and gritty ones. But in the current climate, it seems that like the dark gritty ones are like they lean a little more heavily in the wider audience.
Yeah, I guess I remember reading something about how like a lot of children, or not children, a lot of people our age, you know, we don't trust the government because we haven't really, you know, seen the promises being fulfilled about how great our country is, how we're privileged. Like we see a lot of, you know, people can't pay back their college debt. People, you know, it's so expensive to go to a hospital that people will do anything to not go to the hospital, even if they need it. And stuff like that, where it's like, the simulation is unraveling, you know, it doesn't really seem like things are worth it. And that's why we're more cynical. I remember even seeing something on my story, someone posted like, in my opinion, it feels like to be hopeful or optimistic is naive and irresponsible. And that really stood out to me because like I think most people do feel that way, but putting it that way, it just sounded so harsh. And I wanted to like fight back, but I had no response to that. And I think that's just something, you know, kind of take away from this episode. Because I really do think a lot of these controversial topics are mainly because we believe that we have to be dark and gritty to make a good story. But, you know, unless you understand how to handle that topic, it's not going to turn out well. And yeah, that kind of just ends up happening. And yeah, I think that, you know, why can't we have more positive stories? Like, I think, you know, kind of like Mr. Rogers, there is a way to deal with, you know, serious topics like racism or violence without, you know, watering it down, right? Because in some ways, like, I think in that context, like kids aren't stupid. They just don't know a lot of things yet. And that's your point of the show, is to educate them and make sure they have a good foundation. While now we're kind of like, oh, the world is dark. We should hide it from kids. And then they get traumatized when they find out the truth. And yeah, I just feel like there has to be a responsible way to not have everything just be black and white, or, you know, the world sucks. And those are the stories I want to tell. In short, you know, we had a previous guest like Sahib, who came on and talked about poetry, and he wanted to say like, my art is not just something super dark and depressing. Like I want to have hope in writing, and that's something I hope to see more in the future, where it's not just stories where we're trying to tackle these controversial topics for the sake of it, you know.
Yeah, so that sort of like sums up my little research project here. If you would like to give me a peer review and publish my paper, go for it.
Yeah, make sure Ben can get to grad school as an anime professor. Dude, fund his dreams.
About mecha in my free time, dude. I don't publish an article about mecha and lollies.
Mecha and lollies, dude. I think maybe we should do a part 2, because I think the whole idea of lolicons in anime is like very interesting, how it's so accepted. But outside of that context, like pedophilia is such a big deal, right? But then
yeah, like I feel like a majority of the anime that I sort of like researched was like stuff about lolicons, like Arrow Manga Sensei and like random shit.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and there's also a lot of I mean, I think we touched upon with Monogatari, but there's a lot of incest subtext, and it's one of those things where I'm just like, oh, it's just anime, you know, like I'll just read it, watch it. I'll probably not read it and watch at this point, but like it's not. I won't blink an eye if I see a series like that, you know. While someone else who is not in that world is gonna be like, why is something like that, you know? And I think that's very interesting because especially this thing's the thing, like the word lolicon or loli is not even Japanese. It's from like a European film where I think it's like from Lolita, you know. So
Ah.
that is interesting how it's I guess Japan has kind of co-opted the term for their own detriment. But yeah.
But yeah, to wrap things up, it was a good discussion on controversial media, and I think the major takeaway is be hopeful about what you watch and try to watch things that are balanced in nature.
Yeah, like, you know, to our audience, I know you're small in number, but I hope you write stories too, you know. I think it's good to I think it's definitely possible to write a good story that isn't super dark. And I hope if even if I'm speaking to air that, you know, someone is willing and inspired to yeah, write these positive and optimistic stories because we really need it in 2020. But yeah, wrapping things up, this is Nuanced Nonsense. We're not experts, but we just like talking. Signing out.